Welcome to the All Together Show with Eric Satz. On this show, you'll hear Eric's unfiltered interviews with interesting and untraditional entrepreneurs who ignored boundaries, followed their instincts and owned paths, and are now empowering others to do the same. Subscribe to the show and learn more by visiting alltogether.show. And now, your host, Eric Satz.
Polina Marinova Pompliano, Pomp by Circumstance and Pomp by Monogram. How often does that happen? I mean, it must be meant to be. I think Polina had been married 4 days when we did this interview in a post-COVID world, which made honeymoon and staycation synonymous. And yet she's got a smile as wide as the Grand Canyon and the determination to match it. She came to America as a little girl who spoke no English and used the same to build a life as a journalist before leaving it all behind to do her own thing. She's the creator and founder of The Profile, and you can find it at readtheprofile.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Polina as much as I did.
This episode of the All Together Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto is a digital, self-directed IRA company modernizing IRA investing. They make it easy and cost-effective for individual investors to access their retirement savings and invest in alternative assets. To learn more, visit altoira.com.
Polina Marinova, so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we actually had a conversation a couple of weeks ago.
It was a primer.
It was a primer, and a lot has changed in the world since. Has anything changed in your world since?
Well, I am working away, nothing significant.
Nothing significant. We're going to come back to that. So just for the audience, Polina graduated from the University of Georgia, the actual Athens of the South, as opposed to the proverbial or colloquial Athens of the South, which is where I am in Nashville, Tennessee. Makes her way to New York, becomes a writer for Fortune, takes over the Term Sheet, a highly visible daily newsletter. And then on the sort of precipice of the pandemic, decides she's going to quit and commit full time to launch, or to extend, Read the Profile, which I think is all very factual in nature. But in your own words, could you tell us who you are?
Yes. Also, I just realized that we didn't talk last week. We talked a few weeks ago, so I got married in that time. That's what you were referring to.
Yes, you got married, that little thing.
I have no sense of time anymore, Eric. Very exciting during the pandemic.
Hard to keep track of. So we'll come back to that. So tell us who you are and what drives and motivates you.
Yeah. So my whole life have been a lover of words. I love reading. I love researching things. I love writing. So that's always kind of driven my curiosity to writing. And when I was in high school is when I started working at my high school newspaper. And that's where I kind of discovered my love for reporting and talking to people, because I used to be really introverted. So that kind of made me, open up a little bit and understand the power of telling people stories. So when I graduated from high school, I majored in journalism at the University of Georgia. I became the editor of the school newspaper. When I graduated from Georgia, I worked at a media startup in New York called Aussie. And after that, I joined Fortune magazine, got into the whole world of business journalism that I never thought I would be interested in, because I always thought I'd be an education reporter. But when you're a reporter, you quickly realize you can't be picky about what you cover because there aren't a ton of reporting jobs. And so I was at Fortune for the last 5 years, and then I started The Profile as kind of a passion project on the side, which is my weekly newsletter where I compile interesting long-form profiles of people and companies every week. I started that in 2017 and then took it full time in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic.
You go.
That is my story.
Those are the broad brushstrokes, shall we say.
Yeah.
So let's start with some of the details, and maybe at the beginning. Where and when were you born?
Yeah, I was born in Bulgaria in 1991, and I spent first and second grade in Bulgaria. And then in the middle of second grade, I got pulled out to move to the United States. We moved to Georgia, and here they put me in fourth grade for some unknown reason. And I'm actually writing about this exact topic in this coming newsletter on Sunday. But the topic of education. When I was in Bulgaria, I was horrible. I failed math. Like, we were worried that I wouldn't be able to graduate because I was failing math as an 8-year-old. Because there we were solving for X and doing all this algebra stuff. And then when I came here to fourth grade, we were doing like basic multiplication. And I was like, oh my God. So suddenly I was like a math, genius in the United States. So it's really cool. Like I even though I always say that I think I tend to get along with people who have perspective. And what I mean by that is I grew up in Bulgaria, a former communist country. My family was radically anti-communism. So my dad's dream was to move to America. When we got to Atlanta, and the only reason we moved to Atlanta is because that's the only place we knew people who could help us like get jobs and whatever. Moved to Atlanta, and I grew up in the South, essentially. And then I never knew that people in the South had different viewpoints. It just, that's where I grew up. And then I moved to New York, and that's a whole other perspective. So it's like I have 3 different ones. So it's hard for me to have really extreme opinions because I can see a lot of different sides.
Have you been back to Bulgaria since?
Yeah, many times. Yeah.
Oh, well, fantastic. So you moved to Atlanta. What year is that?
2000.
And any siblings?
I have a younger sister.
A younger sister. Okay.
Yeah.
And so were your parents working in or out of the home when you moved to Atlanta?
Both of my parents were chemical engineers in Bulgaria. And then when we moved to the United States, obviously, no money, no English, like no connections. And also their masters in chemical engineering in Bulgaria, you have to wait until they equalize it to the US standard, all this stuff. So my dad was working 2 jobs at Marriott Hotel as a lobby assistant. I don't know how to say it. And then also at night he would go and work at Popeyes as a dishwasher. So had to really kind of put his ego aside to come to this country and start over.
A lobby assistant. Are you referring to a bellhop or a bellman or some other position?
He was in the lobby, like cleaning up and like making sure the newspapers were right on the table, like things like that. He loved that job because he got to wear a suit and tie, and he thought, I've made it.
It just tells you where we've gone in this country because now nobody wants to wear a suit and tie.
Yeah, that's also true.
I suspect some people are probably yearning for the days where they had to go to the office and wear a suit and tie.
Yeah.
It's amazing what time can do. So
yeah.
What is that like moving to a new country, I guess, in 3rd grade or after 2nd grade and being put in 4th grade, by the way? What is that experience? Because you don't speak English when you come here, do you?
No. It's weird. And like we talked last time, I think I told you. So first of all, kids are brutal, right? They have no filter. So of course, when you're different and you come from a different country, you don't speak the language and you're like the odd one out. I didn't have obviously many friends. I couldn't communicate. But the one thing that was interesting is that I loved reading and words and all that stuff while in Bulgaria. When I came here, I obviously didn't speak the language, but I still wanted to read, like I was trying. So I had a teacher in my English as a second language class who took an interest in me and saw that I was curious. And like, it just amazing that there are people out there in the world like that who she didn't only see teaching as a job. She saw like, oh my God, there's a kid who has some potential to do something and she's interested. Let me try to help her. So she would send me home with these books in English and tell me to translate them in Bulgarian until I understood what the book was about.
That is so smart.
Yeah. And slowly, like I started learning, I started recognizing the words. It was just bless her heart for taking an interest, because without her, like, who knows what I would have
Listen
done.
to your Southern come out in New York City. Bless her heart.
Bless her heart.
Oh, my word. You really did grow up in Atlanta.
So funny.
How many years have you been in New York now?
5.
Okay.
Or almost 6. Yeah.
So most of your life in the South. And do you find that the Southern part of you comes out at given times in New York City? And what are those times?
Yeah, so it was really interesting when I first moved to New York. I didn't realize this was a thing, but it's a thing. I was overly friendly, like at strangers, no matter what. It's so crazy, and I felt like a need, like a compulsion to talk to everybody and make new friends and whatever. Until I realized like that's not the norm, but it did. I think people like it. Like I think people go out to meet new people. So it's like, why would you just stay in your bubble with your friends and not meet other people? Also, another thing was when I used to cross the street, I would always wave at the cars. Even if it was my right to walk, I'd still wave. And I think people are like, maybe don't do that. It's just funny now looking back.
Well, I remember getting to New York for the first time and nobody wants to make eye contact. Nobody.
I know. That was another thing.
And then so when we got to Nashville, we came up with a phrase called Nashville nice. And I don't know if you've experienced this in the South, but there's something, at least in New York, when someone says, let's get dinner or let's go to lunch or essentially extend an invitation, they mean it. And so there's this thing about trying to figure out in the South whether it was just being polite or whether they actually meant it. And that was a new thing for me when I got to the South. I don't know if that was part of your experience growing up or not.
You're saying that in New York, when people say, let's get dinner, they actually mean it. But in the South, you don't know, or the other way around?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
In the Northeast, if someone extends an invitation, I believe them.
Right.
In the South, I'm like, okay, did they mean that?
Yeah.
Or was it just part of the cocktail conversation?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Another thing I noticed is after I had been living in New York, when I went back to Atlanta, a lot of people, when meeting them for the first time, especially if it's another woman, would compliment like an article of clothing, like, oh, I like your shirt, or where'd you get your bracelet? And it was kind of like an opening. And I never realized like nobody in New York does that.
No, they do not. It's a different experience altogether. So teachers actually play an interesting role in your life, I think. I think they play an interesting role in most people's lives, but you actually write about it. And so it sounds like you're going to write about your elementary school teacher coming up here shortly. You've also written about your journalist professor. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about him and the influence that he had on what you wanted to do for a profession?
Yeah, so there have been a few. I think there was one in particular that I wrote about. His name was Conrad Fink. He used to be a writer and editor for the Associated Press. And he basically, he was the type of, when you walked into his classroom, it wasn't a classroom. That's why people learned so much. It was a table, and we would all sit around the table, and he was at the center, at the head of it. And he would just like call on you, ask questions. It was like a dinner discussion. That's what it felt like. It didn't feel like I was sitting there, learning. And I think that that's what a lot of, like, he basically inspired me to think critically. Like I had been conditioned to kind of think like I would read this, I would regurgitate it back on the test. But what he inspired was like, I want ideas. I want you to think like differently. If you were the editor of this publication, how would you handle this? And nobody ever asked me to do that. So I think it opened my eyes to this other world of learning where it was kind of like based on your curiosities instead of tell me what you read in that book.
So maybe the difference between information and analysis?
Yes, information and analysis, and also the ability when you have a small classroom, fewer students, as a teacher, you're able to identify different people's interests faster and better. So, he could understand that I was curious about X, whereas Julie was curious about Y, and ask us about those things and further like develop our expertise instead of trying to teach us like the basics and we're all learning the same things. It's like develop individual students based on their individual interests.
That's really neat. And so when you graduate from UGA, your dad writes you a letter. Can you tell us about the letter that he wrote?
Yeah. So when I graduated, he wrote me a letter that said, basically, when we moved to this country, we didn't have anything. And he felt as though I felt the brunt of it. To me, it's like my parents, like, God, I can't even imagine being in my 20s, moving to a new country and having to start over. But he was saying, like, at that time, we couldn't buy you what you wanted and like the toys you wanted and whatever. So now I'm enclosing this check and I hope that you use, this $1,000 to buy whatever you want. And I thought that was just like a really nice gesture because it showed that I'm sure that when he was 33 years old when he moved here, he thought about like one day I'll be able to, give her whatever she wants and buy her whatever she wants. But because he couldn't do it then, I can't imagine as a parent, like the insecurity that you have to go through to now being able to and making enough money and feeling secure to do that. I think it meant a lot to him, and obviously it meant a lot to me.
What'd you do with the check?
I didn't cash it. So I still have it somewhere, but it was just like, I don't know. I think I know exactly where it is, but it's a good reminder that, one day, like, I'll be able to say, oh my God, remember when we had nothing and this was so meaningful. And because I think with generations, that kind of grit kind of could die down. And I hope that it doesn't.
I hope grit doesn't go away. I hope it
Me
grows.
too.
I think the other thing that I hope, and whether you meant to do this or not, you have, is that more people will think about not just saving, but investing as opposed to spending. And as you know, Alto is all about helping people gain access to alternative investment opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have. So I'm wondering how your childhood has, I don't know if affected is the right word, but influenced the way you think about your own sort of budgeting, spending, saving, investing, and professional choices.
Yeah. So this
loaded
actually,
question, I know.
No, it's great. It reminds me when I graduated from college and I couldn't get a full-time job and I was like crying every day and I was upset and I was like, oh my God, everything's been a lie. I thought I had, because I graduated all cocky. Like, I was the editor of the school newspaper. I had internships at CNN and USA Today. Who wouldn't want to hire me? And then like literally no one. So I was like crying to my mom for the 80 millionth time. And she basically said to me, like, we came to this country and we worked jobs that were like, basically we lived paycheck to paycheck and we worked jobs that were jobs to pay the bills so that you could have like an actual career. You could do what you love to do instead of just getting a job. And when you put it that way, it's just like so jarring because you realize that I wasn't crying because I couldn't get a job. I could go work at Starbucks tomorrow, but I was crying because I was like, I don't have a career and all my friends are doing cool things. So I think it's so interesting that to me, money, like growing up, money was a means to an end. Like, let's get money so we can pay rent and buy groceries. But then as you grow up and you go to college and you're exposed to all these other lifestyles, and like so many of my friends came from private schools and these massive homes I had never even seen in my life. And I was like, oh, so there are like careers and entrepreneurship and you can start your own business. I never knew that. But you don't get there working paycheck to paycheck. So I think it's very, it was instilled to me, like, always have money, never have debt, like, make sure you save for a rainy day, all that kind of stuff. So if I hadn't worked jobs through college and paid off my debt, I would not be able to live in New York right now. Like, I am hyper aware of that, because if I was burdened with massive debt, I could not afford my rent when I got to New York.
So how did you afford rent when you got to New York? Did you have a budget?
Yes. So what was it? $120 a week is what I was allowed to spend. And I wrote down every expense, whether it was $5 for envelopes, $10 for a slice of pizza. And then when you realize that like one cocktail in New York costs $12.50, at the time I was like, oh no, like this is a lot of money. But it puts everything in perspective when you have to write it down and see your $120 dwindle. Then it's like, okay, I gotta actually put a constraint on how much I spend and try to find other ways to do things that maybe don't require spending money. Like, let's go on a picnic to Central Park instead of going out to a really nice restaurant when you're 23 years old. But yeah, so that discipline has always stayed.
Have you by chance seen any of the modern love stories that were produced into, I guess, TV series on Netflix? Is Netflix or Amazon? I'm not sure which.
So I've read the articles, but I haven't seen the stories.
So I actually watched some of the stories because my son told me to. And there's one story where a woman who is essentially giving her unborn child up for adoption and is talking to the to the couple that are going to become the parents to her child, and they're talking about they're out to dinner at a really nice restaurant, and she's like, "Why don't you cook? It is so much cheaper and better to cook. You're wasting all this money going to these really expensive restaurants. You have got to learn how to cook. You're not going to teach my child properly." And it's just I'm not doing justice to the scene, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of what you're talking about, because when you get to New York, your eyes get really big when you look at price tags for the first time.
Oh my God, it's crazy. It's crazy. Especially compared to like Atlanta prices.
Yes. And so you made a reference earlier to perspective or viewpoint when growing up in Atlanta in the South. And I sent you a questionnaire in advance of the show, and there was a question on there was just really appropriately vague. And it said, which side, left or right? Do you remember what your answer was?
Was it right?
It was right.
But see, I thought about it like being on the right side, like being right.
Okay. And so on the right side of an argument?
Or like on the right side of history, on the right side of an argument. Like I thought about it that way.
I love it. No, and the reason I leave it that way is because I want to know what you were thinking when you answered the question. And I think that's really cool to be on the right side of history. I hope we can all be on the right side of history.
Yeah.
Make for a better country, wouldn't it?
It would. And it's so hard because I think that what this country, like, okay, so I obviously from Bulgaria, people there are incredibly direct. Then when I was a sophomore in college, I was selected for this, it was an all expense paid media trip with other student newspaper editors to Israel. And it was like 2 weeks. It was amazing. So we got to meet with New York Times reporters who are based in Israel. We got to meet with politicians, all sorts of people. And the cool part was that everybody was so honest and transparent and just direct. And coming from the United States, like everybody's like, oh, can you believe he just said that? And I was just like, but if you don't say it, obviously you're thinking it. Nobody else knows that. And then it becomes this like weird, like, I can't say what I think because you might get offended, but then if I don't say it, we can't have an honest conversation, and you can't tell me that I'm wrong about something. So it's just like, I just wish that there was more nuance in the US, and people could have really tough conversations without getting so heated and blowing up. And what we have now is extreme divisiveness.
I could not agree with you more. So this is interesting. When were you in Israel? When was this trip?
2011.
2011. Okay. So you were there for 2 weeks. So you saw the whole place. I mean, you can see the whole place in 2 days. It's not large.
Yeah.
Was there a favorite part of the trip?
Oh my God, so many. We went to Jerusalem. That was so interesting. The one thing I'll never forget though is we went to a playground, and it looks like a normal playground. And then they're like, this is actually also doubles as a bomb shelter when, this school has been bombed like 3 times in the last 2 years. And kids, when they go inside this caterpillar that looks like a slide, it's actually a bomb shelter. And I was like, oh my God, these are things that kids there, that's a reality for them.
That's their life.
Yeah. Isn't it so crazy? Have you've been to Israel multiple times?
I did a semester of high school in Israel, which was a long time ago. So we're not going to go into that.
Yeah.
But I also love my time there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and just for people who are listening, I want to be clear. It's not just Israelis that live with that uncertainty. Right. It's everybody in the region, everybody in the area. And I really hope that globally we can find a solution to what's happening there. I think we'd all be better off for it. Speaking of foreign lands, you've also been to Greece, if I remember correctly, and I think you were going to run a marathon, the original marathon. I'm curious, did you run the marathon?
Yes. Yeah. So here's what happened. So I wanted to run. I wanted to actually run the New York City.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm listening.
Yeah, great. I wanted to run the New York City Marathon, but then I didn't realize that, like, the registration, you couldn't sign up. Like, if you signed up in 2019, you had to run the 2021. It was just like a very confusing registration process. It was my error, so I messed it up. And I wasn't eligible. I wanted to run it in 2019 or 2018. But then I was like, I'm not going to wait a whole year to do this. So I managed to convince my now husband to run it with me. And I was like, listen, it's not just any marathon. It's the original marathon. It's from Marathon, Greece to Athens, Greece. Like, what could be better? If you're going to run one, you better run the original. I'm never doing that again. But Greece was awesome. It was really, really cool. Except for, I'm so mad at the taxi driver who wouldn't let us get a ride after the marathon. He's like, oh, no, it's too close. I'm not getting in the car for that. And I was like, come on, man, it's like 3 miles back to the hotel. So then nobody would give us a ride, so we walked back. So I'm so bitter about that.
So I'm sure that's an incredible experience, running the original marathon. I will say that running the New York City Marathon is also an incredible experience. And so
I believe it.
When you're ready to try again, I'm going to encourage you to apply in advance and run the New York City Marathon. Yeah. Yes. No, absolutely. So I also asked you window or aisle.
I said, did I say window?
I actually don't know what you said.
Okay.
So I'm going to
I don't know either.
So I'm going to ask you window or aisle.
So it depends. It's changed recently, but originally window.
Why and what changed?
So I love sitting on the window side if it's somebody I know next to me and like I can make them get up 18 billion times. Otherwise, like I love the window because you get to see everything, especially if you're going somewhere for the first time. You see like the land. It's cool. I don't have any fear of heights when I'm in a plane or anything like that. The only thing is when planes start to land, I get really nauseous. So sometimes I get like, I feel like I'm going to throw up. So I have to literally run to the bathroom. So if, there's like 3 people, I don't want to wake them up and all this stuff. So maybe aisle in that case.
Okay.
TMI.
No, I mean, everybody's got a reason. So
It happens.
So how long did you write the term sheet? For how long?
For 2 and change years.
What was that like taking that over?
Yeah, extremely intimidating.
Who did you take it over from?
Erin Griffith. She is now at the New York Times. At the time, she was at Fortune. Super great reporter, well-sourced. She knew tech, Silicon Valley, venture capital like the back of her hand. I, on the other hand, had come into Fortune, and my goal in my first year at Fortune is to understand 10% of what term sheet said. So that gives you an idea of how much I knew when I first started. But then by the time I took over term sheet, I had developed some sources and some relationships. And I was smart enough to be able to tell people, hey, I don't know everything. So in the cases that I don't know, I'll either tell you I don't know, or I'll call somebody who knows and interview them and give you better answers. I find that when you don't know something, the worst thing you can do is pretend you do, because people can see right through that. So just radical transparency. But it was extremely intimidating. I was very nervous. Every day I would wake up in a panic because I would literally, Eric, wake up at 4 a.m. just to make sure that I could have enough time to compose my thoughts and all that stuff.
Well, there were a lot of people depending on you.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
And by the way, first of all, thank you for sharing that you were just trying to understand what the term sheet said for a long time. And one of our values at Alto is that education will drive equality. And so for those who are listening and are trying to learn about alternative assets and alternative investing and due diligence and how companies raise money and what businesses are doing, I'm just going to throw a shout out to term sheet here as a way to begin to read, and then go Google and familiarize yourself with a bunch of the terms that are in there. So, but back to you and your story. So you take over a newsletter. I don't even know what the circulation is. What do you know? What's the circulation for term sheet?
Let's say tens of thousands. Could be more.
Could be more. So all these people, Silicon Valley, the Northeast, Wall Street, they're waiting to, probably with their cup of coffee or whatever it is they're drinking, they're waiting for that newsletter to hit their inbox so they can know what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
Clearly you were waking up at 4 a.m. That kind of weighs on you. How do you decide what makes it into the term sheet?
Oh, so many things. I mean, obviously you have to understand, what's going on in the news now. What do people care about? And a lot of times they'll tell you what they care about. They'll email you. And I mean, that newsletter is such a powerhouse just because the types of people, sometimes I would get an email and somebody would be giving me an idea or saying I don't like something, whatever. And then I'd Google their name and I'd be like, oh my God, I had no idea that this person was such a big deal. But that's the caliber of people who read it. And so it's a lot of responsibility. It weighed on me greatly because I'm the type of person, when I do something, I want to excel at it. And to think that I could be mediocre or horrible or whatever, just ate at me. But like you said, education, you can learn anything. At least that's what I think. As long as you have an internet connection, you can Google anything. There's books, there's articles, there's people you can ask. So that's what I did. And I hope that people got value out of me bringing that knowledge and what I learned, because we kind of learned alongside each other. And a lot of times, yes, there's the big, powerful people who read it, but there's also the aspiring entrepreneurs and the people who are just now starting to learn about business. So it's kind of it's a dance between all those sides.
I like that analogy or metaphor. I don't actually know what it would be, but the dance.
The dance.
So at what point while you're doing this do you decide that you're going to start the profile, and why?
So actually, I started the profile before I did term sheet.
Oh, okay.
So I started Term Sheet in August of 2017. I started the profile in February of 2017. And it was that in-between period where I was writing articles about, I was covering Uber and these big tech companies. I didn't know anybody there. I was trying. But the whole conversation in 2017, as I remember it, was a lot of people were saying, oh my God, media, journalism, it's all like aggregated, it's all clickbait, it's all like nonsense. And then meanwhile, my friends and I and my coworkers and I would send each other really great long form profiles that had come out that week. And so I was like, why don't I just put this in a newsletter to show like, hey, there's really great journalism out there if you care to read it. So that's how it started. And I was just bored, to be honest. So I had time on my hands to do this after work. So on the subway, I would read articles. On weekends, I would write. But it literally just started with, oh my God. If I show you the first edition of the profile, it's hilarious. There's like a GIF of Elon Musk drinking a whiskey. I don't know what I was doing, but it was a fun thing to do for myself outside of work. And yeah, and Fortune I asked permission to do it because otherwise it could be a conflict of interest. But because I was curating and not creating original content, they had no problem with it.
So, God, you just said a ton of really interesting things in that. And for everyone who is an entrepreneur or wants to be an entrepreneur, and it sounds like this was your experience, and I will just confirm that it's also my experience. There's nothing like learning by doing. And I'll just share with everyone that while this isn't going to be the first published podcast for the show, you and I did the first podcast for the show.
Yeah.
But I was so bad.
No, you weren't.
That I asked you to redo, and you were kind enough to redo. But you look back at that first thing, and you're like, "Oh my God, how could I send that out to the world?" But you learn by doing, and you sort of have to jump off the cliff, take a leap of faith, and just do it. So here's my question: you decide you're going to launch this, you're going to do this. How do you get circulation? Everybody knows that distribution is hard. What did you do?
I put it on Twitter and I put it on Facebook, and I got, for the first issue, I think I had like 140 subscribers, which were all family, friends, and coworkers.
Yeah, but still, that's a big number. 140 is a big number.
Is it?
For a first newsletter? That's a big number.
Yeah, it was like, basically I knew most of the people. It was like family and friends, some like random, relative in Bulgaria that saw it on Facebook and signed up. Like it wasn't, really, really a crazy number of people. But then I still have never done like true advertising for it. So it's been mostly word of mouth. Like I've done links off with other newsletters and things like that. That was a big thing in the beginning. I told people, listen, like I don't have a huge distribution, but what I do have are really, really high quality people that work at these companies. If you want exposure to them, and like my click-through and my open rates are really high, if you want exposure to them, we can do a link swap. Even though you have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, they are not as engaged as mine are, or maybe not as high quality. So we provide each other value. So that it really helped the flywheel start going.
The flywheel, by the way, is a Silicon Valley term that people can Google. Well, it is now, because everyone wants to know, about your network effect or your flywheel, and is it built into your business model?
I meant it more like abstract.
I know what you meant, but so do you have a sense for how many people are on distribution lists for number 10?
No. So in the first year, I got by literally, I think it was like December 31st, I hit 5,000. So maybe 500. What happened is everyone started sending it to each other.
Have you calculated that growth, by the way, from 140 to 5,000?
Yeah.
Have you done that?
Yeah.
That's real.
That's real, but it's small numbers. It's not like I went from.
There is a law of small numbers. I agree. But what I'm telling you is if you talk to Alex Lieberman at Morning Brew about how the Morning Brew grew during the first year, you should compare your numbers to his numbers. And by the way, you're just going to have to listen to the podcast that I do with Alex.
Oh, you did one with Alex?
About
Great.
the Morning Brew.
I would love to hear that one. Oh,
and
great.
So you can listen to how that started. And I'm telling you, your numbers are fantastic.
Thank you, Eric. Hopefully they stay that way.
Yeah. Hey,
there we go.
To God's ear. So, I didn't realize, by the way, that you started Profile before you started Term Sheet.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that Term Sheet was an accelerator for growth at Profile. Can you connect those dots? Was there correlation there?
Definitely. And it was because the people who read Term Sheet then would maybe click on my Twitter account and then saw that I was doing this other thing. I don't know how many of them converted, but I do know on the last day at Fortune in Term Sheet, I said what I was leaving to do. And so many people came to the Profile because either they just wanted to keep up with me, or they liked my writing, or they were just like, curious about what this is about. Regardless of why they came, a lot of them have stayed. So I still get to have those really awesome conversations with the same people I used to talk at Term Sheet.
That's fantastic. So it's, what is it, March of this year? Is that? So March of this year, you're ready to leave the security of Fortune and kind of roll your own. So take us through that. Take us through that thought process.
So I started thinking about it in January, and I think we talked about this last time, but it literally felt like everything I listened to and everything I read was just like, do it. if you don't leave now, you'll never leave. Literally everything that would come up on my Twitter account was like confirmation bias. Everything I saw was like, yep, definitely. But then I would have that other side of my brain that was like, what are you thinking? You've been writing in Term Sheet how, there's a looming recession on the way. Like, why? This is pre-corona anything, but it was like, it's 10 years, there might be a recession. Why would you leave your secure job before a recession hits? So I thought about all that, and then this push and pull was driving me crazy. So in my planner, I circled March something, and I was like, I'm just going to do it. And if it's in my planner, it's happening. So I told Fortune in the beginning of March. So I gave them 3 weeks basically. And my last day was March 20th. And even still in the beginning of March, I had no idea what coronavirus would bring, what the pandemic would be, that we would all be shut down in our apartments. But it did in a weird way, because people, after they've exhausted all the traditional Tiger King and whatever they're watching and reading and doing, after they've exhausted all that, they're like, what? I have money to spend because I'm not spending it on anything else. Maybe I'll pay for the Profile because I like the content. I want to get more and I want to learn.
You really think that's the connection?
That's in my head. That's the connection.
Okay, then that's the connection. So here's my question. Do you announce to your readership that you're starting the subscription before you tell Fortune you're leaving?
No. Oh, wait. Oh, you mean the paid subscription?
Yes.
Oh, yes. So because I started thinking about it in January, I started testing the paid version. So I just wanted to know, would people pay for something like this? So I added the paid layer in January, kind of saw how many people are converting, and then backed into the math of how many subscribers would I need to match my salary at Fortune. And that was my goal. And that's how, otherwise, I really do think before you do something drastic, like quit your job, try to use math and a plan, or math and common sense to see if this is a viable thing that will make money. Because otherwise you'll be like my grandmother in Bulgaria. She saw on Facebook that I said I was leaving my job to start, but I hadn't told anybody. So she called my mom and she's like, oh my God, she got fired. What are we going to do? How is she going to make money? I was like, no. Poor translation on Facebook. I did not get fired, but yeah.
You should definitely blame Facebook for that one.
I should.
Or Duolingo. I'm not sure what app she was using, but so you announce in January. What's the immediate reaction? Like, when do you know it's going to work? When can you extrapolate out to, okay, I'm going to get X number of conversions, and worst case, I'll be even?
So by March, because I had been doing it for 2 months, I had an idea of how much, if I had gone at this rate, how much I would make, and I was okay with that. But then what you fail to account for, like if you look at the chart of how many people subscribe to the profile, it explodes the day after I start working on it full time. And that's because I'm pouring all my energy into it, and I'm like doing things to help it grow, right? There's only so much you can do while you have a full-time job, and you don't want to like piss off that job by doing something else, So I stopped myself from doing a lot of things that I knew would work because I was still at Fortune. So I did link swaps. I got people to write for the profile. I freelanced for The Hustle, and they included my link in their massive newsletter. All those things help. And the more people you get to see the value of the profile, I find that after 2 or 3 weeks, they convert to the paid version. So you need to show people the value first before you ask them to pay, obviously. But right now, I am on track to make more money this year than I've ever made in any salaried position in my career before.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'll tell my grandmother too, so she's not worried.
Yes. Let's be sure to tell your grandmother. Yeah. Not easy to do. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
You bet. So which article that you wrote for Fortune was the most interesting article to you?
Yeah. I'll say the one that I wrote, it was a profile on Jeff Jordan, who's an investor at Andreessen Horowitz. And he was an early investor in
This is when you went hiking, right?
Yes, I went hiking with him in the morning. And while interviewing him, so you can hear on my recorder, it's like, and I was just like trying to breathe and ask my question. But
I used to run that hike, by the way.
Oh, really?
I know that hike. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, okay. You used to run it. I could barely walk and talk. But it was really cool because I didn't think it would be hard. I thought it's a profile. Like, I'll just say what he did and whatever. But then you realize that to do a profile really well, you have to capture kind of like the small quirks of the person that wouldn't be obvious. And yes, I spent a day with him, which is more than any reporter that does a profile on somebody. Usually you get like 1 hour with the celebrity to write a profile on them. But I got the whole day. I got to see him interact in different situations with students. He mentored some students. He went on a hike. He talked to me one-on-one. It was really good. But then it was so hard because it's like a human being, and it's like,
it's not like a human being. It is a human being.
It is a human being. And it's just like, I know for myself that no matter who it is, no matter how great and glowing the profile is, I still won't like it if it's done on me, because I know myself in a way that somebody who spends a day with me wouldn't know. But it was just a really good exercise in understanding that, you have to pay attention to everything and be able to kind of explain your blind spots too.
Try, by the way, watching yourself on these things. I don't know if you've ever done that before.
It's horrendous.
Yeah, it's the worst experience ever. Oh my God. So, how do you decide what makes it into the profile?
Yes. Okay. So I'd like to think I listened to this podcast once with, blanking on his name. He writes The Browser. It's Robert. Oh, it's okay. I'll look it up. Yeah.
We can Google it.
Okay,
while you're
Google
talking. I'll Google The Browser.
The Browser newsletter. Yes. He said that he considers himself kind of like a film critic, like a critic of good content. What is his name? Robert.
I'm looking for the about.
Oh, okay.
Here we go. No, you go.
Basically, he sees himself as a critic.
Robert Cottrell. Robert Cottrell.
Yes.
There you go.
So Robert talks about how it's about taste in developing a taste of good articles and what's considered good. It's very hard to say like this is a great profile and this is not, when they both have the same amount of reporting, the same length, the same whatever. But it's just about taste. Like I can read a profile and be like, wow, this was really good, and read another one and be like, this is trash. But it's just about the.
Do you immediately get online and send an email? This was trash. I can't believe you published this.
Yeah, but the thing is that you become kind of like a critic, and you develop a taste over time. And the people who subscribe to your newsletter, if they typically like what you put in and the variety that you put in, they tell you. So, for example, I have 8 or 9 profiles, and only one of them I highlight and I say this is highly recommended by me. Who decides? But I decide.
You decide.
Yeah. So I say this article is a highly recommend. It's really good. I hope you read it. Only, I think it's maybe 3 times in the history of the profile have people the most clicked profile has not been the one that I highly recommended.
It's the first one I click for obvious reasons.
Thank you, Eric. But it is because I think 1, people trust me, and 2, it typically aligns with their interests. I'm not gonna like just, I don't know, do one that's totally out of the norm. But if I see that they clicked on something else and not that one, I'm like, oh, interesting. Like maybe people aren't as interested in this topic as I thought they would be.
So, by the way, you're just practicing tried and true practices. So the cover of a catalog, by the way, that's going to be the best-selling item. The top items on a menu, those are the best-selling items. The house specialties. So when you say highly recommend, it's like saying house specialty, spaghetti carbonara. I mean, who then orders the spaghetti puttanesca? I don't know. Not me, but,
Right. Exactly.
So, all right. So New York City is your favorite city.
Yeah.
You've lived there for 5. Why is it your favorite city? You've traveled. Why is New York City your favorite city? It is the hardest place in the world to live.
The hardest place, like the craziest place, but it's just, I love that there are so many. You can get on the subway and you see an elderly lady next to a girl with pink hair, next to a guy with a nose ring, next to like somebody with a cello. It's like so cool. and like in New York, you have more of a chance of bumping into somebody like that with a fascinating, interesting story than I think you have anywhere in the world, just because it attracts that type of person who is, it has all sorts of different, it has journalism, it has finance, it has fashion, like all sorts of different industries come here. And then it's like ideas. Like I love learning at the intersection of like several different ideas. And if you don't expose yourself to new disciplines and new topics and new people, you'll only stay with your old, rusty ideas. So this way, you can broaden your horizons, Eric.
So I don't disagree, by the way. I love New York, and I lived in New York for how long? 7 years.
Wow.
So when you're on the subway and you see all these people who clearly have different stories,
mm-hmm.
Do you build the story in your head, or do you ever talk to them? Do you ever inquire as to their story?
I do if we weren't on the subway. Sometimes.
So
yeah.
I'm just going to tell you, I don't know if you've read this article, but there is an article, and I've actually heard other people talk about it before, which says that the happiest people are people who talk to strangers.
Ooh.
And they often highlight the fact that people who will talk to the person sitting next to them on an airplane, like sort of fit into this category.
Can you send me that article?
I'll have to Google it.
Okay.
I don't have it, but I'll send it to you. I think you would really be interested in it. And I'm not going to kid you. Airplane is easier than subway. But I'm just saying, the more strangers you talk to, the happier you're going to be. That's
fascinating. I might look into that. But that's why I love Humans of New York. I mean, he talks. He also graduated from the University of Georgia, by the way. But he talks to so many different types of people, and he captures their stories. And I love the types of people who you see, you immediately pass judgment, and then you read their story, and you're like, whoa, it's nothing like I thought.
So here's another one. Have you seen the introductions between two people where the room is completely dark, like one person can't see the other person, they're having conversations? Okay, this is something you're going to have to Google also. Like, the soundtrack is so different from the visual once you get the visual. You're like, there's no way I would have connected that voice and those thoughts and those issues and those concerns to what I'm seeing.
Oh, I love that. This is the stuff I love. Okay.
It's amazing. That one you're going to have to Google on your own.
Okay.
But it's out there. I mean, it's really, really cool. Okay. We're getting close to the end here. So you forgot that you got married last week.
I forgot that we had our interview before last week.
No, but we're going to go with my version of the story.
Okay.
So you got married like 2 weekends ago.
Yes. July 11th. What are we now? I don't even know. July 23rd.
We are July 23rd. So
okay.
Yeah. So 2 weekends ago. Where'd you get married? Who'd you marry? How was it?
It was awesome. So basically, my now husband Anthony, 2 weeks ago, or actually like a month ago, we were supposed to get married on April 18th of 2020. Obviously, that didn't happen because of COVID. So then we pushed it to July 11th. And in April, July seemed like a world away. And then time kept moving and nothing was changing. And we were like, okay, do we want to keep pushing this, or do we just want to get married? Because that's the point of a wedding. So we got married with nobody there, no family, just the officiant, who was his brother, and then the witness, who was the photographer. And I was
going to ask if the witness was the photographer.
Yeah. So it was at the original venue. We just got the second floor, and yeah, it was simple. It took an hour. It was awesome. We walked. So it was also like a day where there was like a tropical storm in New York, of course. But we went outside to take some pictures in the West Village where the venue is. And then the sun came out. There was no rain for 15 minutes. We took pictures and then we went back. It was great. Highly recommend.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the start of a very long story, I hope.
I hope so too. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. So, do you feel different or the same?
See, it doesn't. I think if you want to get married just because you think something's going to dramatically change, or you're waiting for some problem to go away, it's not going to happen. It's literally, daily life, everyday life, you get married, and then again, everyday life. It's up to you to keep evolving as a human, but it's not just going to erase everything and you start over.
Agree 100%.
At least that's my experience.
Well, I think that's right. You don't get married to try and solve a problem.
No.
You want to add layers of complication to an already problematic relationship? Get married or have kids.
Right.
Right? So
yeah.
neither of those will solve the underlying issue. Okay. Well, hey, thank you for being on the show, for doing it twice.
Thank you. I hope this time was even better than last.
There's no doubt in my mind that it was, because you did more of the talking than I did. So
I think it was great. You should publish both, honestly.
Maybe we will. Until next time.
Awesome.
Thank you, Polina.
Thank you, Eric.
The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto knows that the public markets offer insufficient diversification of retirement accounts. That's why Alto developed a streamlined platform to make it easy and cost-effective for anyone to invest their tax-advantaged retirement savings in alternatives. Assets like real estate, venture capital, and crypto that are outside of the public markets and available through Alto's 21 platform partners. To learn more, Visit altoira.com.